The Vendorpedia platform is purpose-built to automate the third-party risk lifecycle with 3 core capabilities: assessments and due diligence, global risk exchange, and vendor chasing services.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond Penetration Testing, Developing a Defensive Cyber Workforce. If you're joining us live, our speaker is in the Slido chat discussion answering your questions right now. For audio-video issues, click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn it over to Keon Williams for the presentation.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I'm glad that of the sessions that you had to choose from, that you did choose to attend this session. I'm honored that this is my second opportunity to support the RSA conference. I spoke live and in person in San Francisco earlier this year. And although I was looking forward to being physically in Singapore, I'm excited that we still have the opportunity to share the information with you virtually. One of the reasons for this presentation is my love of people. From a security perspective, people are always talking about the idea that your security program depends heavily on people, processes, and technology, but the focus of what everybody really invests their time and energy in is more on the process side or on the technology side. Part of my conversation today is going to focus on the people part of security, which is very much in line with the human element theme that RSA Conference has been promoting throughout the year. The idea that cybersecurity provides confidentiality, integrity, and availability for the environment, for the organization, for your infrastructure, and for your data is very important. And surely we cannot accomplish those goals without technology, but it's the people behind the technology that make the biggest difference for the success of the organization and for your programs. What you'll find as we go through this presentation is that while technology is important, the capability, the wisdom, the intuition, and the actions of the people on your security team and the people in your environment make a huge difference about the success of your program and how well it works to support the risk management and cybersecurity goals of the organization. Now, this is focused on people, and the title says Beyond Penetration Testing. It would not be fair for me to say that penetration testing has no value. What I strive to express is that although penetration testing is sexy, that everybody's excited about it, that everybody wants to be on the red team, the real magic of your security program happens with those people who are dedicated to the blue team efforts, to working to defend the organization, to understanding the myriad of attacks that the organization is facing so that you put the right countermeasures in place, and also so that you respond properly when the worst case scenario does happen. Usually there's much more emphasis on offensive practices. This is where you get things like the CEH that focuses on ethical hacking. This is where everybody is focused on cyber defense from an offensive perspective, rather than saying that your best defense is the priority. People focus on what is the best offense so that we can identify the weaknesses. In reality, the role of the blue team to understand the entire scope of the situation, everything that the organization is doing, and to fix every hole that possibly exists as part of the threat landscape and the collection of vulnerabilities that you're facing is a much harder job, and it really demands a much higher level of focus if organizations are going to continue to be successful. Now, when you think about red team and blue team, generally these concepts are understood. Because this is a learning session, it's important that we define the terms and make sure that everybody is on the same page. When we're talking about a red team, your red team is often comprised of a small number of technical experts who are working to find holes in your defenses. When we say hole, this could be common vulnerabilities and exposures. It could be unpatched systems. It could be vulnerabilities that exist in your software and your infrastructure or in the network. And in this context, success for the red team is simply just finding that one hole or that one opening that provides access to the environment, which ultimately leads to the compromise. The much harder effort and most of your pressure really exists on the blue team, where you have to understand the entire threat landscape everything that the organization is facing and contribute effectively to the incident handling or the incident response process that includes planning, containment, eradication, recovery, and even in some instances, you're also focusing on post-incident analysis to make sure that you understand how did the attack occur so that you update your defenses and prevent that attack from happening again. This role is much broader in scope. It requires a lot more effort. It requires a lot more knowledge because we're not focusing just on finding one hole and fixing it, but we're focused on understanding all of the holes that exist within the organization. This demand and the problem for the blue team is really the thesis of the conversation, that you can't have good cyber defenses if you don't have good cyber defenders, and we can't have the entire security profession focused solely on red teams and penetration testing. We have to start to invest time, money, and resources in developing the talent, the knowledge, the skills, and the capabilities of the people who are going to defend our organizations from cyber attack. Now, when we talk about managing your defenses, again, the red team is not something that is of limited value, but the red team in context of the organization and the wider concern is really what we're focusing on. Lax cybersecurity practices, poor patch management, all of these things work together to influence how well or how poorly your security program is going to function and the success that you're going to be able to achieve. It's apropos that for the Asia Pacific and Japan conference, we used the SingHealth data breach as an example to talk about what could go wrong. The findings from this breach highlight how important it is that the people who work in the blue team role that are defending the organization have the right knowledge, the right skills, and the right capabilities, not only to defend the organization, but also to respond properly when an attack happens. Now, this is not disparaging for SingHealth. These are just the facts as they are presented in the report that was done. But when the data breach originally occurred, the findings that were produced as part of the Actor Action Review noted that lapses in security, lapses in the control, lapses in the understanding of the incident handling process and the incident response program allowed 1.5 million people in the country of Singapore to have their personal health information exposed and exfiltrated by the attackers. This also affected prescription information for 160,000 people, including the Prime Minister. A lot of this could have been prevented if you read the report that was generated and released in January of 2019. There were numerous factors that contributed to not the data breach itself, but to the poor response that was in place at the beginning of the evaluation. You know, if we were to take step by step, what happened and how did it happen and how can we learn from it? Part of the problem was poor patch management. Staff, both at a security perspective and an IT infrastructure perspective, and within the organization, fell prey to phishing attacks. There were weak administrative passwords, and all of the domain expertise and all of the resources for incident response were at a higher level of the organization. They didn't rest within SingHealth itself. When you look at the control failures, incident response personnel were unfamiliar with incident response processes. They were overly dependent on the government agency that supported IT for the health sector, and they failed to understand and act on the significance of the data that was provided after it surfaced. Now, this is not disparaging, again, for SingHealth. This happens in all types of cases. If you go farther back and look at the Target data breach that happened in North America a few years ago, the issue was similar. You have a third-party managed system security service provider that is doing security monitoring, is generating reports, and is feeding that information to the organization. But the volume of the data that exists makes it very difficult to identify, understand, and act properly upon the findings that are reported. And so again, in this case, where you have a lot of investment on the red team, the weakness and the failure and the consequence for the organization rested more importantly on the capabilities of the blue team and the people who were defending the organizations. The commission that conducted the investigation As part of their findings, one of the statements that stood out and makes a huge difference in this conversation is that even if organizations delegate work to vendors, organizations as the data controllers must take responsibility for the personal data that they've collected from their customers. In some cases, it's going to be customer data. In other cases, depending on your organization, it's going to be corporate secrets or other types of information of significant value that make the difference between success or failure for the organization. Again, focusing solely on penetration testing and the red team activities is not going to equip you to respond properly. When you look at the weaknesses and capability of the blue team and the defenders, even at the government sector that was responsible for providing support, the senior cybersecurity manager was fired because he had a mistaken understanding of what constituted a security incident and when an incident should be reported. The report specifically noted that this person had a passiveness that, after repeated alerts by his staff, caused him to miss opportunities that could have mitigated or averted the impact of the attack. And so we're not saying that excellence in this area would have stopped the breach, but we're looking at the impact of the breach. There is a lot that you could do to prevent 1.5 million records worth of data exfiltration from happening within the organization. It's not just finding the weakness, but it's also responding properly when the event is identified. Similarly, the information security officer was demoted because that person misunderstood what constituted a security incident, and that person failed to comply with established, formally documented incident responding procedures. Richard Magnus, the chair of the Committee on Inquiry, his most significant report, or the most significant outcome in the report, simply stated that one must not lose sight of the fact that the treatment of cybersecurity issues and incidents by staff and middle management is very much shaped by organizational culture. What we have in a lot of organizations around the country, in the Asia Pacific region, as well as in North America, in the Gulf Coast countries, in Europe and Africa, regardless of where you go in the world, a lot of organizations are spending the bare minimum to achieve compliance outcomes, and they're trying to supplement those compliance outcomes with penetration testing and third-party evaluations of the security controls. If we're going to move beyond penetration testing, it becomes very important that organizations start to invest in the training, the professional development, and the capabilities of their staff so that you can avoid situations where the people who are responsible for security and incident response are ill-equipped to handle their duties and their responsibilities. The second bullet on the slide highlights a study from ESG and the Information Systems Security Association from 2017 that said that the cybersecurity skills shortage is exacerbating the number of data breaches that are happening globally. That is a factual statement that reinforces the theme of this talk. When you dig into the report from ESG and ISSA, you'll find that a lack of adequate training for non-employees is the number one concern, where a lack of adequate cybersecurity staff is the second concern. It takes the conversation not just beyond penetration testing, but also beyond just general security awareness training. The best thing that cybersecurity professionals can do for their organizations is make sure that the people that are supporting the organization understand the impact of their actions on the security posture. They understand the reason why security is asking them to do certain things. For example, why do I go through phishing training? The phishing training is not just to satisfy a compliance requirement, it's to make sure that end users who do not deal with cybersecurity topics and concerns on a daily basis understand the primary risk that they're exposed to, and they understand how they should act or how they should respond when they see something suspicious. It is very easy for one person clicking on one link in an unintended or unauthorized phishing message to cause the entire infrastructure to be compromised. That ultimately leads to data exfiltration, or could lead the entire organization's infrastructure to become the victim of a ransomware attack that creates an outage, could put people's livelihoods at risk, could ultimately cause the business to shut down, and then everybody loses their jobs. And so the idea of going beyond penetration testing is really shifting us into a conversation about the entire corporate culture for the organization. Does the board of directors, does the CEO, does the CIO, do all of the executive staff, do all of the users within the organization understand the risks that the organization is facing? And do they understand the role that they all play within the organization to counteract those risks and to do something about it? Your red team is going to identify all the holes, but the blue team is going to be the part of the organization that generates that understanding, that generates that awareness, and helps people come to the conclusion about why all of this matters. Now, as we move forward in the presentation, there is a focus on developing the skills of non-technical employees. The majority of the employees in a company, unless you're a technology company or a digital manufacturing company, most of the people that work in your organization are going to be non-technical employees that probably don't have the same level of knowledge as your IT staff and as your security staff. A good framework for building the knowledge, the skills, and the capabilities that they have to understand their risk and to respond appropriately is going to be a standards-based approach. NIST Special Publication 800-50 is a great starting point, one, because it's free, and anybody that goes to the Cybersecurity Resource Center for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, found at csrc.nist.gov, can download the document, they can evaluate it, they can look at all of the content that is provided to help you go beyond using a vendor tool and start to think about, how do I really make an impact for the organization? Have I identified the role of education in our process, where education seeks to generate long-term understanding and a true, deeply held appreciation of facts or information? You know, what are we doing for training? Are we developing new knowledge? Are we developing new skills that are going to equip our non-technical workforce to understand and recognize the cyber threats that they're facing and the indicators of compromise that might be evident on their computer systems, whether that's in an email, whether that's in a screen flickering, whether that's in some unauthorized or inappropriate behavior? You know, finally, taking the approach that's in the NIST document is going to help people to understand the role of awareness, which is to increase the perception of facts and reinforce everything that you've learned in your educational programs and to reinforce everything that you've learned in your training programs. The combination of these three approaches as an ongoing activity, not just once a year for compliance, but month after month, year after year, over the entire existence of the organization, is going to develop and enhance the capability of your non-technology workforce, of all of those employees who have business roles, financial roles, marketing roles, sales roles. All of those people are going to start to develop an appreciation of what can they do to protect the organization, under what circumstances are they going to notify the security teams that something is fishy, and to overcome the compelling human desire to just click on every link in every email that comes across their desk or ends up in their inbox. As people start to increase their awareness, as they start to focus on the greater good that comes from understanding the risk and reporting things properly, the organization is going to be in a better strategic position to communicate, express, and reinforce ideas that enhance the risk management and the acceptable level of risk that's established within the company. Now, as we dig deeper into the conversation, establishing clear objectives and understanding the methods for your education, your training, and your awareness is going to be very valuable. You want to make sure that you're tying the education, training, and awareness to establish policies, that you help people understand their role and do role-based security, that you help people understand what to do. There's a big difference between having a policy that says this is what you must do and having reinforcing material that says, why are you doing this and why is it important? You know, you think about things like changing your password every 90 days and having, you know, an 8-character password with uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. That makes sense from a security context, but to really get people to understand and to apply and to take those requirements seriously, you have to make sure they understand the reason why are we asking you to do this? The why goes into things like the susceptibility to attack, the strength against a brute force attack, the likelihood of compromise, the likelihood of password guessing. Most of your non-technical users within the organization are very smart people. And if you take the time to get them to understand why you're asking them to do things, they are more likely to embrace the ideas and apply those ideas to their work. Similarly, thinking about the delivery methods, gamification has been growing in popularity, but it's not the only approach. Not everything has to be a webinar. Not everything has to be computer-based training. Taking the time to evaluate and understand the makeup of your workforce, how they learn, what are different delivery models. Do we do a combination of instructor-led sessions, lectures, town hall meetings, follow-up emails, Q&A sessions, posting things on Slack or on a public forum that allows people to ask questions without shame and without any kind of negative consequence. All of those things are going to work together to support a multi-variable approach that allows everybody to experience the positive benefits and the positive outcomes of your training programs. Another thing to consider is that as you're investing the time and the energy and the resources to develop your non-technical workforce, these people actually have the opportunity and the ability to add to the capabilities of the blue team. You imagine a situation where all of your employees recognize a phishing attack, and then they send those notifications to the blue team, to the people who are working on defenses. The blue team can now start to develop trends and understand what's going on in the environment. What are people seeing? What are they observing? And now you've equipped your workforce to be part of the solution rather than simply saying the users are the weakest link in the organization and they're just a part of the problem that you have to manage. Now, the role doesn't, or the responsibility does not just rest on the workforce and the end users, but as we saw in the Sing Health example, there is a huge responsibility that exists for the cybersecurity professionals that work in the organization. An adequate security team is going to have a balance of offensive and defensive capabilities. This brings to bear or brings to mind the idea that your red team and your blue team are both important and they are both going to work together. Their roles satisfy different requirements. Under normal circumstances, your attackers know how to attack broadly using a variety of tactics, techniques, and procedures that allow them to apply all kinds of offensive capabilities. Within your organizations, if you're increasing the adequacy of your cybersecurity staff, you're going to develop cyber ranges, you're going to develop tools and techniques that allow your team to practice, you're going to do use cases that allow people to verify that they have the ability to identify and respond properly to the most likely threats that you're going to face. This also ties in the idea of enterprise risk management in all of your security controls, where your red team, your blue team, and your risk management professionals are working in conjunction to ensure that you understand what is the susceptibility to attack that the organization faces because of the quality and the effectiveness of the controls that you have in place. This is going to allow the defenders to focus on where is the most likely threat going to come from, what are the most likely areas of weakness, and where am I going to focus my attention? Now, as somebody who works in professional development for cybersecurity people, I have a bias, but I highly encourage the CISOs, that organizations, that the CEO, that the CIO, anybody who has influence over budget should ensure that they invest properly in the training of the individuals, not just for the offensive capabilities and getting certifications like CEH, but also focusing on the defensive capabilities, where you make sure that your defenders, your managers, and the people who are leading the development of your security strategy are getting CISO level certifications, are getting manager level certifications, that they're learning how to be good leaders so that they respond to events properly and that they coordinate the teams properly. Similarly, investments in automation are going to enhance and extend the capabilities of your workforce so that you shift away from managing everything manually, depending on the knowledge, the wisdom, and the intuition of a person, and you start to adopt automated response, EDR, and other tools that are going to speed up the process so that the people who are working on your security team are focused primarily on the novel and unique things, not spending hundreds of man hours going through the same mundane, repeatable process that you could have leveraged technology to provide an automated response for. In closing, as we draw near to the end of the conversation, in the tradition of RSA, there are always things that you can apply now within the short term and within the long term so that you can adopt everything that we've said and reap the rewards for your own organizations. In the short term, it's important to remember that tools are great, but you cannot manage security without people. I highly encourage all security leaders and all organizations to invest in the people that they have supporting the organizations. Remember that people are people first, and they're driven by needs and emotions. And one of the greatest needs that you can fulfill for your security talent is to make sure that they're getting continuing education and that they're continuing to learn. If things become stagnant, if they become mundane, if they become uninteresting, it increases the likelihood that the critical people that you're depending upon on your blue team are going to overlook or not notice new types of attacks, new threats that you're facing, or new incidents that could be occurring. You also want to make sure that you develop a balanced security team. The entire theme of this conversation is that we need to go beyond penetration testing. Penetration testing people are important, but they're not the holy grail or the silver bullet of your security program. They're just one component. When you think about immediate actions that you can take, getting to know everybody in the organization and what's driving them is going to be an important component for success, as well as understanding how the business operates. A industrial control systems organization or a manufacturing organization is going to face different risks and require different types of security investments compared to a financial services organization or an organization that collects a lot of personally identifiable information. As you start to gain traction, as you start to gain success with this approach, you also want to start to establish metrics that represent that things are getting better, that we're doing a good job, that our investments are satisfying the requirements that we set out to establish. And then finally, as part of your long-term plan, you want to make sure that you are investing meaningfully over a period of time in your security staff. You want to make sure that you're applying now the cultural shift, not only to your non-technical and technical employees and to the security team, but also to your vendors, to your third parties, and to everybody who has access to the environment. The more you can ingrain these strategies into the culture and the fabric of the organization, the more you're going to have the ability to reduce risk, to avoid compromise, and to respond quickly when that incident that everybody encounters actually occurs within the organization. I thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I thank you for being part of the RSA conference, the Asia Pacific Japan edition, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you very much.